The cold bit through Beatrice Whitmore's cotton dress like 1,000 tiny knives, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here in the Montana wilderness. Her uncle's wagon had disappeared over the ridge an hour ago, leaving nothing but wheel tracks in the frozen mud, and the echo of his final words still ringing in her ears like a death knell. It was November 1878, and the temperature had dropped so fast that afternoon that the sky itself seemed to turn gray and hard as iron. Beatrice wrapped her arms around herself and stumbled forward along the rutted road leading away from Helena, though she had no idea where she was going or what she would do when the sun finished setting behind the distant mountains. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting copper and salt. The fight had started over something so small, so utterly insignificant, that Beatrice could barely remember what sparked it now. Her uncle Samuel had been drinking again, pulling from that flask he kept hidden in his coat, and his words had grown meaner with each mile they traveled. She had defended herself when he criticized her mother, his own sister, who had died just 3 months prior, and that had been the final straw for him. "Get out," he had said, his face purple with rage and whiskey. "Get out of my wagon right now, you ungrateful little wretch." "Uncle Samuel, please," she had begged, seeing the desolate landscape around them. "We're miles from anywhere. It's getting dark and cold." "Should have thought of that before you ran your mouth," he spat. "I've got half a mind to leave you right here. Maybe it will teach you some respect." But he had not just threatened. He had actually done it, grabbed her arm with his rough hands and shoved her off the wagon seat, her small bundle of belongings following her into the dirt. Then he had snapped the reins and driven away without looking back, leaving his 19-year-old niece alone in the gathering darkness. Beatrice forced herself to keep walking, though her legs felt like lead and her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves. She had been traveling with her uncle for 2 weeks, ever since the fever took her mother and left Beatrice with nowhere else to go. Samuel had promised to take her to his home in Missoula, where she could work as a housekeeper, but his resentment of the burden had been clear from the start. Now she understood that he had never intended to help her at all. The wind picked up, howling across the open prairie and cutting through her clothes as though they were made of paper. She could see her breath hanging in white clouds before her face. The sun was almost gone now, just a thin line of orange on the horizon, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky above. Her foot caught on a rock, and she fell hard, her palms scraping against the frozen ground. For a long moment she simply lay there, lacking the strength or will to rise. Perhaps it would be easier to just stay here, to let the cold take her and end this misery. She closed her eyes. Then she heard it. The sound of hoofbeats approaching fast, and a man's voice calling out, "Hey! Hey there, are you hurt?" Beatrice tried to push herself up, but her arms would not cooperate. She heard the horse come to a stop nearby, then boots hitting the ground and running toward her. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, turning her over gently. "Jesus Christ, you're frozen half to death," the man said, his voice rough with concern. "Can you hear me? Can you talk?" Beatrice forced her eyes open and found herself looking up into a face weathered by sun and wind, with sharp blue eyes that reflected the last light of day. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair that curled over his collar and a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore a heavy coat and a worn hat, and his expression was one of genuine alarm. "I can hear you," she managed to whisper through her chattering teeth. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" he demanded, already shrugging out of his coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth of it was almost painful against her frozen skin. "Where did you come from?" "My uncle," she said. "He left me. We had a fight." The man's face darkened with anger. "He left you out here in this cold? Which direction did he go?" "That way," Beatrice said, pointing weakly down the road. "But it was over an hour ago, maybe longer." The cowboy cursed under his breath, colorful language that would have made her mother faint. "Can you stand? We need to get you warm right now, or you are going to lose your fingers and toes, if not worse." He helped her to her feet, and she swayed against him. Her legs barely held her weight. Without hesitation, he swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing and carried her to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that stood patiently waiting. "I'm going to put you up first, then I'll mount behind you," he explained, his breath warm against her cheek. "Just hold on to the saddle horn, and I'll make sure you don't fall." He lifted her into the saddle with surprising ease, then swung up behind her, one arm coming around her waist to hold her steady, while his other hand gathered the reins. Beatrice leaned back against his chest, too exhausted and cold to care about propriety. The heat of his body seeped through her clothes, and she found herself pressing closer, desperate for warmth. "There's a line shack about 2 miles from here," he said, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I've been using it while I scout this territory for good grazing land. It has a stove and supplies. We'll get you warmed up and fed, and then we can figure out what to do about your uncle." "Thank you," Beatrice whispered. "You saved my life." "Don't thank me yet," he said, but there was a hint of kindness in his gruff tone. "Just stay conscious. Talk to me. Tell me your name." "Beatrice Whitmore," she said, forcing the words out. "Everyone calls me B." "I'm Fletcher Dalton," he replied. "And you can call me Fletcher or Fletch, whichever suits you. Now keep talking, B. Tell me about this uncle of yours." She told him the story as they rode through the deepening darkness, her words slow and halting at first, but growing stronger as some feeling returned to her limbs. Fletcher listened without interrupting, though she could feel the tension in his body growing as she described how Samuel had thrown her from the wagon. "Man like that deserves a good beating," Fletcher muttered when she finished. "Leaving a young woman alone in the wilderness. He's lucky I didn't catch up with him tonight, because I might have forgotten my Christian upbringing." Despite everything, Beatrice felt a small smile tug at her lips. "You're a Christian?" "My mother would say I'm a poor excuse for one," Fletcher admitted. "But I try to live decent, and I know right from wrong, which is more than your uncle can say." They rode on in silence for a while, and Beatrice found herself growing drowsy despite her best efforts. Fletcher must have noticed because he tightened his arm around her waist and spoke more urgently. "Stay awake now," he commanded. "I know you're tired, but you need to stay conscious until we get you properly warmed up. Tell me more about yourself. Where were you living before your uncle came for you?" "Virginia City," Beatrice said, fighting to keep her eyes open. "My mother and I ran a boarding house there after my father died in a mining accident 5 years ago. When she got sick this summer, I nursed her for 3 months, but the fever was too strong. She passed in September." "I'm sorry," Fletcher said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "That's a heavy loss." "She was all I had," Beatrice said quietly. "The boarding house belonged to our landlord, so when she died, I had nowhere to go. Uncle Samuel showed up at the funeral and offered to take me to Missoula. I thought he was being kind, but I think he just wanted my mother's savings, which was only about $40 anyway. He took that the first day we traveled." Fletcher cursed again. "Your family sounds like a real prize saving me." "He's not my real family," Beatrice said. "Not in any way that matters. My mother always said her brother was a bitter, angry man who blamed the world for his own failures. I should have listened to her and found another way." "Well, you're safe now," Fletcher said firmly. "And I give you my word that I'll see you safely to wherever you want to go once you're well enough to travel." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since her uncle abandoned her. This stranger was showing her more kindness than her own blood had, and the contrast made her chest ache. She blinked the tears away, not wanting to cry in front of this man who had already seen her at her lowest. The line shack appeared out of the darkness, a small wooden structure that looked sturdy despite its crude construction. Fletcher dismounted first, then helped Beatrice down, catching her when her legs buckled. He half carried her to the door, kicked it open, and brought her inside. The interior was simple but clean, with a small iron stove, a bunk built into one wall, a rough table, and 2 chairs and shelves holding supplies. Fletcher deposited Beatrice in one of the chairs and immediately set about building a fire in the stove, working with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Don't sit too close to the heat yet, he warned, as orange flames began to flicker in the stove. You need to warm up gradually, or it will hurt worse. I'm going to tend to my horse, and then I'll make you something hot to drink. He left her alone for a few minutes, and Beatrice sat very still, watching the fire grow stronger through the open door of the stove. Feeling was returning to her extremities in painful waves, a burning sensation that made her gasp. Her fingers throbbed, and her toes felt like they were being stabbed with pins. Fletcher returned, carrying his saddlebags and her small bundle, which he must have spotted on the road. He set them down and pulled a pot from the shelf, filling it with water from a barrel in the corner. He hung the pot on a hook over the stove to heat, then turned his attention back to Beatrice. "Let me see your hands," he said, kneeling in front of her. She held them out, and he carefully removed her gloves, examining her fingers with a critical eye. His own hands were warm and calloused, rough from years of hard work, but surprisingly gentle. "Good," he said after a moment. "They're cold, but I don't see any signs of frostbite. You were lucky. Another hour out there and it would be a different story. Now let me check your feet." "I can do it," Beatrice protested, embarrassed. "I'm sure you can, but I have more experience with this than you do," Fletcher said practically. "I've spent plenty of winters in Montana, and I've seen what cold can do to a person. Don't be modest when your health is at stake." He had a point, so Beatrice allowed him to unlace her boots and slip them off, followed by her stockings. Her feet were pale and felt like blocks of ice. Fletcher examined them with the same care he had shown her hands, pressing gently on her toes and watching the color return to the skin. "These are fine, too," he announced with obvious relief. "You're going to be sore for a few days, but I think you'll make a full recovery. Now let me get you that hot drink." He stood and busied himself preparing coffee, strong and black, with sugar stirred in. He handed her the tin cup and watched as she took her first sip, the hot liquid burning pleasantly all the way down. "Slowly," he cautioned. "Small sips. Your stomach isn't ready for much after what you've been through." Beatrice obeyed, cradling the cup between her hands and letting the warmth seep into her bones. Fletcher pulled the other chair close and sat down, studying her face in the firelight. "You have some color coming back," he observed. "That's good. How do you feel?" "Warmer," she admitted. "Everything hurts, but in a good way, if that makes sense." "Perfect sense," Fletcher said with a slight smile. "That means the blood is flowing properly again." "You're going to be fine, Bee." She looked at him properly for the first time since he had rescued her, taking in the strong lines of his face and the kindness in his blue eyes. He was handsome in a rugged, unself-conscious way, the kind of man who was comfortable in his own skin and his own abilities. She judged him to be in his mid-20s, old enough to have experience but young enough to still have fire in his blood. "Why were you out there?" she asked. "You said you were scouting for grazing land?" Fletcher nodded. "I work for the Triple Bar Ranch, about 15 miles south of Helena. The owner, Benjamin Carter, sent me up this way to look for new winter pasture and check on the line shacks, make sure they're stocked and ready in case any of the hands need shelter during a storm. I was heading back to the main ranch when I spotted you on the road." "God must have been watching over me," Beatrice said quietly. "Maybe so," Fletcher agreed. "Or maybe it was just luck. Either way, I'm glad I came along when I did." They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the sound of the wind outside. Beatrice finished her coffee, and Fletcher took the cup from her, refilling it without asking. He also pulled out some dried meat and hardtack from his supplies, insisting she eat something. "I'm not very hungry," she protested. "Eat anyway," Fletcher said firmly. "Your body needs fuel to recover from the cold, just a little bit to start." She nibbled on the food, finding that her appetite increased once she started eating. Fletcher watched her with approval, then fixed himself a plate and ate as well. When they had both finished, he stood and moved to the bunk, pulling off the rough blankets. "You're taking the bed tonight," he announced. "I'll sleep on the floor by the stove." "That's not fair," Beatrice objected. "This is your shelter. I should sleep on the floor." "Not a chance," Fletcher said. "You nearly died today, and you need proper rest. Besides, I've slept in worse places than a warm floor. Don't argue with me on this, Bee. You won't win." There was something in his tone that told her he meant it, so she simply nodded. Fletcher helped her to the bunk and tucked the blankets around her with surprising care, making sure she was completely covered. "Try to sleep," he said softly. "If you need anything during the night, just call out. I'll be right here." Beatrice watched as he made himself a bed on the floor, using his saddle as a pillow and his coat as a blanket. Despite his assurances, she felt guilty taking the bunk while he slept on the hard ground. But exhaustion was pulling at her like a heavy tide, and within minutes, she drifted off into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke several times during the night, confused about where she was, but each time she saw Fletcher's form by the stove and remembered she was safe. Once she woke to find him feeding more wood into the fire, moving quietly so as not to disturb her. When he noticed her eyes were open, he gave her a reassuring nod, and she fell back asleep. Morning came slowly, gray light filtering through the small window. Beatrice sat up carefully, finding that her body ached in a dozen places, but her head was clear and she felt immeasurably better than the night before. Fletcher was already awake, heating water for coffee and moving around the small space with easy efficiency. "How do you feel?" he asked when he noticed she was awake. "Better," Beatrice said honestly. "Much better. I think you saved my life." "You would have done the same for me," Fletcher said, though they both knew that was not necessarily true. Many people would have ridden right past a stranger in trouble, not wanting to get involved. He made them both breakfast, which consisted of more coffee, some beans he heated over the stove, and the last of the hardtack. It was simple food, but it tasted wonderful to Beatrice, who had not eaten a proper meal since the morning before. As they ate, Fletcher outlined his plan. "I need to get back to the Triple Bar today to report to Mr. Carter," he explained. "You're welcome to come with me. The ranch is a good place, and Mrs. Carter is always looking for help in the house. I think they might hire you on if you're interested in that kind of work." "I don't want to impose," Beatrice said hesitantly. "You're not imposing," Fletcher assured her. "Besides, what else are you going to do? You said your uncle took your money, so you can't exactly book passage on a stage, and I'll be damned if I'm going to leave you alone in Helena with no resources and nowhere to go. Come to the ranch at least for a while until you figure out your next step." Beatrice considered this. She had no other options, no friends or family to turn to, and no money for lodging or food. Fletcher was offering her a lifeline, and she would be a fool not to take it. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you, Fletcher. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Don't worry about repaying anything," Fletcher said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Just get yourself healthy and settled. That will be payment enough." They finished their meal, and Fletcher packed up his supplies, while Beatrice tidied herself as best she could with the limited resources available. Her dress was wrinkled and dirty from her fall, and her hair was a tangled mess, but there was not much she could do about it. She braided it simply and pinned it up, then wrapped herself in Fletcher's coat again when he offered it. "You need it more than I do," he said when she tried to protest. "I've got layers underneath, and I'm used to the cold. You just wear it and don't argue." They stepped outside into a morning that was bright but bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds in the air. Fletcher's horse, Sam, was waiting patiently where he had been tied for the night, and he nickered softly when he saw his master approaching. Fletcher helped Beatrice into the saddle again and mounted behind her, settling her against his chest with his arm around her waist. It should have felt scandalous, being held so close by a man she barely knew, but instead it felt safe and right. Beatrice tried not to think too much about that as they set off toward the Triple Bar Ranch. The ride took several hours, following a trail that wound through rolling hills covered in brown grass and scattered stands of pine trees. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with snow. It was beautiful country, harsh but magnificent, and Beatrice found herself drawn to it despite the cold. Fletcher talked as they rode, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch and the people who lived there. The Triple Bar was a working cattle operation with about 2,000 head of stock and a crew of 15 ranch hands. Benjamin Carter, the owner, had started the ranch 20 years ago with nothing but determination and a good eye for land. His wife, Martha, had come west with him from Illinois and was known throughout the territory for her kindness and common sense. "They're good people," Fletcher said. "Fair and honest. You'll like them." "How long have you worked for them?" Beatrice asked. 5 years, Fletcher replied. "I came to Montana from Texas, looking for a fresh start after my father died. Mr. Carter took a chance on me even though I was just a kid, barely 19 and full of hot air. He taught me everything I know about ranching in this climate. I owe him a lot." "Do you have any other family?" Beatrice asked, curious about this man who had appeared in her life like an avenging angel. "A sister, married and living in Denver with 3 children," Fletcher said. "I visit when I can, but it's not often. What about you? Any siblings besides your uncle?" "No," Beatrice said. "I was an only child. My mother always said I was enough of a handful for 10 children. Fletcher chuckled. "I can believe that. You've got spirit, I can tell. Most women would still be crying after what you went through yesterday, but here you are, ready to face whatever comes next." "I don't have much choice," Beatrice said quietly. "Crying won't change my situation. I have to keep moving forward." "That's the right attitude," Fletcher said approvingly. "You're going to do just fine, Bee." They arrived at the Triple Bar Ranch just after midday, riding through a gate marked with the brand burned into a wooden arch overhead. The ranch headquarters consisted of a large main house, a bunkhouse, several barns and outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses and cattle. It was clear that this was a prosperous operation, well maintained and efficiently run. Fletcher rode directly to the main house and dismounted, helping Beatrice down. Before they could even reach the porch, the front door opened and a woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 45, with brown hair streaked with gray and a round, pleasant face. "Fletcher!" she exclaimed. "We were starting to worry about you. You were supposed to be back yesterday evening." "I ran into some trouble, Mrs. Carter," Fletcher said. "Or rather, I found someone who was in trouble. This is Miss Beatrice Whitmore. She needs help, and I was hoping you might have a place for her here." Martha Carter's sharp eyes took in Beatrice's disheveled appearance and the way she swayed slightly on her feet, still weak from her ordeal. Her expression immediately softened with concern. Of course," she said, bustling forward. "Come inside, dear, before you freeze to death out here. Fletcher, you go find Mr. Carter and give him your report. I'll take care of Miss Whitmore." Fletcher caught Beatrice's eye and gave her an encouraging nod before heading toward the barn. Martha took Beatrice's arm and guided her into the house, which was blessedly warm and smelled of fresh bread and coffee. The interior was comfortable and well furnished, not fancy but solid and welcoming. Martha led Beatrice to the kitchen and settled her at a large wooden table, then poured her a cup of hot coffee without asking. "Now then," Martha said, sitting down across from her, "tell me what happened and don't leave anything out." Beatrice told her story for the second time in as many days, and Martha's expression grew darker as she listened. When Beatrice finished, Martha reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That uncle of yours should be horsewhipped," she declared. "What kind of man abandons his own niece in the wilderness? It's unconscionable." "Fletcher saved my life," Beatrice said. "If he hadn't come along when he did, I would have frozen to death." "Fletcher's a good man," Martha agreed. "One of the best we have working here. Now let's talk about you. Fletcher said you need a place to stay and work. As it happens, I do need help around the house. My last hired girl got married last month and moved to Butte with her husband. I've been managing on my own, but it's a lot for one woman. Can you cook and clean and do general housework?" "Yes, madam," Beatrice said eagerly. "I helped my mother run a boarding house for 5 years. I can cook, clean, do laundry, mend clothes, and keep accounts if needed. Well, that settles it then, Martha said with a smile. The job is yours if you want it. Room and board plus $15 a month. Does that sound fair? $15 was more than Beatrice had expected, and she felt tears of relief prick at her eyes. That sounds more than fair, Mrs. Carter. Thank you so much. I promise I'll work hard. I'm sure you will, Martha said. Now let me show you to your room so you can wash up and rest. You look exhausted, dear. Martha led her upstairs to a small but clean bedroom with a window overlooking the ranch yard. There was a proper bed with a thick quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and even a small rug on the floor. To Beatrice, who had spent the previous night in a line shack and nearly died the night before that, it looked like paradise. Take your time settling in, Martha said kindly. There's water in the pitcher and clean towels in the dresser. Come down when you're ready, and we'll have some lunch. Left alone, Beatrice sank down on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, great shaking sobs of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. She had been so close to death, so certain that her life was over, and now she was safe in a warm room with a job and a place to stay. It seemed too good to be true. After a few minutes, she pulled herself together and washed her face and hands, then tried to make herself more presentable. Her dress was beyond help without a proper washing, but she did her best to brush the dirt off and smooth the wrinkles. She would have to ask Mrs. Carter if there was a possibility of earning or buying some new clothes, as her small bundle contained only one other dress and a few undergarments. When she went back downstairs, she found Martha setting the table for lunch. A man had joined her, tall and lean with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He turned when Beatrice entered and gave her a warm smile. You must be Miss Whitmore, he said, extending his hand. I'm Benjamin Carter. Welcome to the Triple Bar. Thank you, Mr. Carter, Beatrice said, shaking his hand. Your wife has been very kind to me. Martha is the kindest woman I know, Benjamin said with obvious affection for his wife. And Fletcher gave me the full story of how he found you. I want you to know that you're safe here for as long as you need to be. No one will turn you out into the cold again. I appreciate that more than you know, Beatrice said sincerely. They sat down to lunch together, and Beatrice found herself relaxing in the couple's easy company. They asked her questions about her life and her skills, but never in a prying way, and they shared stories about the ranch and the surrounding territory. It felt almost like having a family again, and Beatrice's heart ached with a bittersweet mix of grief for what she had lost and hope for what might lie ahead. Fletcher came in partway through the meal, having finished his work with the horses. He had washed up and changed his shirt, and Beatrice found herself noticing again how handsome he was, especially when he smiled at something Mr. Carter said. Sit down and eat, Fletcher, Martha commanded, already filling a plate for him. You must be starving after being out in the cold for 2 days. Thank you, Mrs. Carter, Fletcher said, taking the seat across from Beatrice. His eyes met hers, and he gave her a questioning look, silently asking if she was all right. She nodded and smiled, and he seemed satisfied. The conversation flowed easily, and Beatrice learned that Fletcher was well respected on the ranch, not just as a cowboy, but as someone Mr. Carter relied on for important decisions. He had a good head for business and a deep understanding of cattle and land management. It was clear that he had a bright future ahead of him, possibly even as a ranch foreman someday. After lunch, Martha put Beatrice to work in the kitchen, showing her where everything was kept and explaining the household routine. Beatrice was grateful for something to do, a way to feel useful and begin earning her keep. She washed the dishes while Martha prepared dough for tomorrow's bread, and they chatted comfortably as they worked. That evening, Beatrice joined the Carters for dinner, a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Fletcher ate in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands, as was customary, but Beatrice found herself wondering what he was doing and whether he was warm enough. Over the next few days, Beatrice settled into her new life at the Triple Bar Ranch. She rose early each morning to help Martha prepare breakfast, then spent the day cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, and performing the 100 other tasks that kept a household running smoothly. The work was hard but satisfying, and Martha was a patient teacher who praised Beatrice's efforts and gently corrected her mistakes. Beatrice saw Fletcher most days, though only in passing. He was usually out working on the range, mending fences or moving cattle or performing the countless other jobs that came with running a ranch. When they did encounter each other, he always tipped his hat and asked how she was settling in, but their conversations were brief and public, nothing like the intimate journey they had shared on horseback. She found herself thinking about him more than she should, remembering the warmth of his arms around her and the kindness in his voice when he promised she would be safe. It was foolish, she told herself. He had simply been doing the right thing, helping someone in need. She should not read anything more into it than that. But then she would catch him watching her from across the yard, or he would go out of his way to carry something heavy for her, and she wondered if perhaps she was not the only one feeling this strange pull between them. 2 weeks after her arrival at the ranch, Fletcher appeared at the kitchen door one afternoon while Beatrice was kneading bread dough. Martha had gone to visit a sick neighbor, leaving Beatrice alone in the house. "Afternoon, Bea," Fletcher said, removing his hat. "Is Mrs. Carter around?" "She's out visiting Mrs. Henderson," Beatrice replied, her hands stilling in the dough. "Did you need something?" "I was hoping to talk to you, actually," Fletcher said, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "If you have a moment." "Of course," Beatrice said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Come in. Would you like some coffee?" "That would be nice," Fletcher said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Beatrice poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table, sitting down across from him. Fletcher turned his cup in his hands, not drinking, clearly gathering his thoughts. "I wanted to check on you," he finally said. "Make sure you're doing all right here, that the Carters are treating you well." "They're wonderful," Beatrice assured him. "I couldn't ask for better employers or kinder people. I'm very happy here, Fletcher. Thanks to you." "I'm glad," Fletcher said, and he seemed to relax slightly. "I've been worrying about you, wanting to make sure you were settling in properly." "You've been worrying about me?" Beatrice asked, surprised and pleased. Fletcher met her eyes. "Of course I have. What kind of man would I be if I rescued you just to abandon you to whatever fate brought you next? I feel responsible for you, Bea." "You're not responsible for me," Beatrice said gently. "You've already done more than anyone could ask. You saved my life, Fletcher. I owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything," Fletcher said firmly. "I did what any decent person would do." "No," Beatrice disagreed. "Most people would have ridden right past. You stopped, and you took care of me, and you brought me here where I could be safe. That's not something I'll ever forget." They looked at each other across the table, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Beatrice felt her heart beating faster, felt the pull toward this man growing stronger. Fletcher cleared his throat and took a sip of his coffee. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about. I heard from one of the hands who was in Helena yesterday that a man matching your uncle's description was seen in town, drinking at the Silver Dollar Saloon. I thought you should know in case he comes looking for you." Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think he would?" "I don't know," Fletcher admitted. "But I want you to be careful. If you see him, you tell me or Mr. Carter right away. Don't try to talk to him alone." "I won't," Beatrice promised. "I never want to see him again." "Good," Fletcher said. "Because if he does show up here, he's going to have to go through me first." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Beatrice's breath catch. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Thank you, Fletcher." He turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip strong but gentle. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped on the table between them, neither speaking. Finally, Fletcher drew back, though he seemed reluctant to break the contact. "I should get back to work," he said, "but I meant what I said, Bea. If you need anything." Anything at all, you come find me." "I will," she whispered. After he left, Beatrice stood at the window and watched him walk back toward the barn, his hat pushed back on his head and his shoulders square. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart racing beneath her palm. Something was happening between them, something real and undeniable, and she had no idea what to do about it. That evening, Martha noticed Beatrice's distraction and asked what was troubling her. Beatrice hesitated, not sure how much to reveal, but Martha had been so kind that she found herself confiding in the older woman. "I think I'm developing feelings for Fletcher," she admitted quietly. "And I don't know if that's appropriate or wise, given that we work on the same ranch and he's the one who rescued me." Martha smiled knowingly. "Fletcher is a good man, Beatrice. One of the best I've ever known, and I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. I don't think you're alone in your feelings." "Really?" Beatrice asked, hope flaring in her chest. "Really?" Martha confirmed. "But you're right to be cautious. Relationships that start in dramatic circumstances can sometimes fade when life returns to normal. My advice is to take your time, get to know each other properly, and see if what you're feeling is real and lasting. If it is, then you'll know. And if it's not, well, at least you'll have given it a fair chance." "That's good advice," Beatrice said. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter." "Call me Martha, dear," the older woman said with a warm smile. "We're past formalities now." Over the following weeks, Beatrice and Fletcher began spending more time together, gradually and naturally. He started taking his meals in the main house more often at Martha's invitation, and he would linger after dinner to help Beatrice with the dishes or sit by the fire and talk. They discovered they had much in common despite their different backgrounds. Both had lost parents young. Both valued honesty and hard work, and both dreamed of having a place to truly call home. Fletcher told her about his childhood in Texas, the son of a rancher who had lost everything in a bad drought. His father had died of a broken heart, Fletcher said, unable to bear the loss of the land he had worked his whole life to build. His mother had passed when he was just a boy, and his sister had married and moved away, leaving Fletcher alone in the world. "That's when I decided to come north," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars. "I needed a fresh start, somewhere that didn't hold so many painful memories. Montana gave me that." "Do you ever regret leaving Texas?" Beatrice asked. "Sometimes," Fletcher admitted, "but mostly I'm grateful. If I had stayed, I would still be mourning what was lost instead of building something new. Coming here taught me that sometimes the best thing you can do is let go of the past and move forward." Beatrice thought about his words long after they said goodnight. She too had been forced to let go of her past, though not by choice, but perhaps that was not such a bad thing. Perhaps her uncle abandoning her had been a twisted sort of blessing, bringing her to this place and this man. As November turned to December and the snow began to fall in earnest, Beatrice found herself falling deeper in love with Fletcher Dalton. It was not just his handsome face or his strength, though she certainly appreciated both. It was the way he treated everyone with respect, from Mr. Carter down to the youngest ranch hand. It was his quiet confidence and his dry sense of humor. It was the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. One Saturday afternoon, Fletcher asked if she would like to take a ride with him, promising to have her back before dark. Martha gave her permission with a knowing smile, and Beatrice bundled up in her warmest clothes, including the heavy coat Martha had given her. Fletcher had saddled 2 horses, and he helped Beatrice mount before swinging onto his own horse. They rode out together across the snowy landscape, the world quiet and clean around them. Fletcher led her to a high ridge that overlooked the entire valley, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, and the mountains rising majestically all around. "This is my favorite spot," Fletcher said as they dismounted and stood side by side, looking at the view. "I come here when I need to think, or when I just want to remember how big the world is." "It's beautiful," Beatrice breathed. awed by the sweep of land and sky before them. It is, Fletcher agreed, but when she looked at him, he was watching her instead of the view. Her breath caught, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold air. Fletcher stepped closer, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair that had escaped from her bonnet back behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. "Bee," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she whispered. "I've fallen in love with you," Fletcher said, his blue eyes intense and sincere. "I know it's only been a few weeks, and I know the circumstances of how we met were unusual, but I can't deny what I feel anymore. You're in my thoughts every moment of every day. When I'm out on the range, I find myself hurrying through my work so I can get back to the ranch and see you. When you smile at me, it feels like the sun coming out from behind clouds. I love you, Beatrice Whitmore, and I needed you to know that." Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, or that I was just grateful to you for saving me. But it's more than that. So much more. I love you, Fletcher Dalton." Fletcher let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her face against his chest. He was warm and solid and real, and she felt safer in his embrace than she had felt anywhere in her entire life. "I want to marry you," Fletcher said, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I know it's fast, but I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything. Will you marry me, Bee?" Beatrice pulled back just enough to look up at his face. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Fletcher's whoop of joy echoed across the valley, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm against hers despite the cold. Beatrice had been kissed before, brief and fumbling embraces with boys back in Virginia City. But nothing had prepared her for this. This was passion and promise, and the beginning of forever, all wrapped up in one perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Fletcher took her hand and held it tight. "We'll tell the Carters tonight," he said, "and we can be married as soon as you want. I don't have much to offer you yet, just my salary and a bunk in the ranch bunkhouse, but I'm saving up to buy land of my own someday. I promise I'll build you a good life, Bee." "You already have," Beatrice said, squeezing his hand. "You gave me back my life when you found me on that road. Everything else is just a bonus." They rode back to the ranch, holding hands as much as possible, stealing kisses when the horses drew close enough together. By the time they arrived back at the ranch headquarters, the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Martha and Benjamin were delighted by the news of their engagement, though not particularly surprised. Martha hugged them both and immediately began planning the wedding, insisting it should be held at the ranch with all the hands and neighboring ranchers invited. "We'll have it on Christmas Day," she declared. "What could be more perfect? A wedding and Christmas together. Oh, there's so much to prepare." "We don't need anything fancy," Beatrice protested, but Martha waved her objections away. "Nonsense. You deserve a proper wedding, and that's what you're going to have." Over the next 3 weeks, the ranch became a flurry of activity as preparations were made. Martha enlisted Beatrice's help in sewing a wedding dress from white muslin, simple but beautiful, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Martha had been saving for years. Fletcher worked extra hours to save more money, and he built Beatrice a beautiful hope chest from pine wood, carving their initials into the lid. They spent every free moment together, chaperoned by Martha or one of the other ranch hands, learning about each other and planning their future. Fletcher talked about his dream of having his own ranch someday, a place where he could build something lasting. Beatrice shared her hope of having a large family, children who would grow up knowing they were loved and wanted. "How many children do you want?" Fletcher asked one evening as they sat by the fire in the main house. "At least 4, Beatrice said. "Maybe more. I hated being an only child. It was lonely." 4 sounds perfect, Fletcher agreed. Though I should warn you, they'll probably all have my stubborn streak. And my temper, Beatrice added with a laugh. Heaven help us, Fletcher said, but his eyes were warm with love. 2 weeks before the wedding, trouble arrived in the form of Beatrice's uncle. He rode onto the ranch on a cold afternoon, his horse lathered and his face red from cold and drink. Beatrice was hanging laundry when she saw him coming up the drive, and fear seized her heart. She dropped the clothes and ran toward the barn where Fletcher was working. Fletcher, she cried. It's my uncle! He's here! Fletcher emerged from the barn immediately, his face hardening when he saw the approaching rider. Get inside the house and stay there, he ordered Beatrice. Don't come out no matter what happens. Be careful, Beatrice begged. I will, Fletcher promised, then strode out to meet Samuel Whitmore. Mr. Carter and several of the ranch hands, alerted by Beatrice's cry, came running as well. They formed a loose semicircle behind Fletcher, a show of solidarity that made Beatrice's heart swell even as she worried. Samuel pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted unsteadily. Up close, he looked even worse than Beatrice remembered, his clothes dirty and his eyes bloodshot. He reeked of whiskey even from a distance. Where is she? Samuel demanded, his words slightly slurred. Where's my niece? That little ingrate owes me. She doesn't owe you a damn thing, Fletcher said coldly. And you need to leave this property right now before I throw you off. You can't tell me what to do, Samuel spat. I'm her uncle, her only family. She belongs with me. You abandoned her in the wilderness to die, Fletcher said, his voice deadly quiet. You have no claim on her anymore. She's under the protection of this ranch now, and that means she's under my protection. So I'm going to say this one more time. Leave. Now. Samuel's face turned purple with rage. Who the hell do you think you are? Some cowboy nobody telling me what to do? I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. Go ahead and try, Mr. Carter interjected, stepping forward. I'm Benjamin Carter, and this is my ranch. Miss Whitmore is employed here of her own free will and is an adult woman who can make her own decisions. She doesn't want to see you, and we don't want you here. You have 5 minutes to get back on that horse and ride away, or we'll tie you up and deliver you to the sheriff in Helena for trespassing. The sheriff? Samuel laughed bitterly. He's a friend of mine. He won't do anything. Then we'll go over his head to the territorial marshal, Mr. Carter said calmly. Either way, you're leaving. The only question is whether you do it on your own or with help. Samuel looked around at the assembled men, all of whom stared back with hard, unfriendly expressions. Even drunk, he could see he was outnumbered and outmatched. His shoulders sagged in defeat. Fine, he muttered. Keep the ungrateful wretch. She'll probably end up a whore anyway, just like her mother. Fletcher moved so fast that Beatrice, watching from the window, barely saw it. One moment he was standing still, and the next his fist connected with Samuel's jaw with a sickening crack. Samuel went down hard, sprawling in the dirt. Don't you ever speak about her or her mother that way again, Fletcher said, standing over Samuel with his fists clenched. Now get up and get out of here before I really lose my temper. Samuel scrambled to his feet, holding his jaw and glaring at Fletcher with pure hatred in his eyes. But he climbed onto his horse without another word and rode away, swaying dangerously in the saddle. Fletcher stood watching until Samuel was out of sight, then turned and walked back to the house. Beatrice met him at the door, throwing her arms around him and holding on tight. Is he gone? She asked, her voice muffled against his chest. He's gone, Fletcher confirmed, and he won't be back. Not after that. Thank you for defending me, Beatrice said, pulling back to look at his face, and for defending my mother's honor. Your mother raised an amazing woman, Fletcher said simply. She deserved to be spoken of with respect. That night, Beatrice lay in her bed, thinking about what had happened. She had been so afraid when she saw her uncle riding onto the ranch, afraid that somehow he would take her away, or hurt Fletcher, or destroy the happiness she had found. But Fletcher had stood up for her without hesitation, had risked his own safety to protect her. It was just one more reason to love him. Christmas Day arrived clear and cold, with fresh snow coating everything in white. The ranch had been transformed for the occasion, with pine boughs and red ribbons decorating the main house and the barn where the ceremony would be held. Neighbors from surrounding ranches began arriving early in the afternoon, their wagons and horses filling the yard. Beatrice, dressed in her wedding gown with Martha's help, her hands shaking as she buttoned the tiny buttons at her wrists. Martha fixed her hair in an elaborate style, weaving white ribbons through the dark curls, and placed a simple veil on her head. "You look beautiful," Martha said, her eyes shining with tears. "Fletcher is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Beatrice said. "If it weren't for him, I would be dead. Instead, I'm about to marry the man I love and start a new life. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." Martha hugged her carefully, mindful of the dress. "You deserve every bit of happiness, my dear. Now come on, it's time." They walked to the barn together, Martha's husband meeting them at the door to escort Beatrice down the makeshift aisle. The barn had been cleaned and decorated beautifully, with chairs set up in rows and lanterns hanging from the rafters. All the ranch hands were there in their Sunday best, along with what seemed like half the territory. But Beatrice only had eyes for Fletcher, who stood at the front waiting for her, his dark hair slicked back and his eyes shining with love and wonder. He wore a new suit that he had bought specially for the occasion, and he looked so handsome that Beatrice's breath caught. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, performed by a traveling preacher who had been passing through Helena. Fletcher's voice was steady and sure as he spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish Beatrice for all the days of his life. Beatrice's voice shook with emotion as she made her own promises, but she meant every word with her whole heart. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her with such tender passion that the assembled guests burst into applause and cheers. Beatrice felt tears of joy streaming down her face as she clung to her new husband, hardly able to believe this was real. The celebration that followed was joyous and loud, with music and dancing and more food than Beatrice had seen in months. Martha had outdone herself, preparing a feast that included roast beef, ham, potatoes, vegetables, pies, cakes, and countless other dishes. Beatrice and Fletcher danced together for hours, laughing and talking with their guests, but always returning to each other. As the evening wore on and the party began to wind down, Fletcher led Beatrice away from the barn toward one of the smaller outbuildings. She looked at him questioningly. "I have a surprise for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. He opened the door to reveal a small cabin that Beatrice had never paid much attention to before. But now she could see that it had been completely renovated, with new windows, a fresh coat of paint, and furniture arranged inside. There was a bed covered in a beautiful quilt, a table and chairs, a cook stove, and even curtains on the windows. "Fletcher!" Beatrice gasped. "When did you do all this?" "The hands and I have been working on it for the past 2 weeks, whenever we had spare time," Fletcher explained, looking pleased with himself. "Mr. Carter said we could use this cabin as our home until we save enough to buy our own land. It's not much, but it's ours." Beatrice walked inside slowly, taking in every detail. It was small, just one room really, but it was clean and warm and perfect. Someone had even left a fire burning in the stove and flowers on the table. "It's wonderful," she said, turning to face her husband with tears in her eyes again. "I love it, Fletcher. I love you." "I love you too," Fletcher said, pulling her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dalton." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and Beatrice melted against him. This was her husband, her home, her future. Everything she had lost when her mother died, everything her uncle had tried to take from her, had been restored tenfold. She was no longer alone in the world. She was loved and cherished and safe. That night, They consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies with wonder and delight. Fletcher was gentle with her, patient and caring, making sure she felt comfortable and cherished. Beatrice gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with her body, as she had already trusted him with her heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the new bed, Fletcher's arms wrapped around her and her head resting on his chest. Beatrice traced lazy patterns on his skin and marveled at how perfectly content she felt. "I can't believe this is real," she murmured. "A month ago, I was dying in the snow, certain my life was over. Now I'm married to the most wonderful man in the world and starting a whole new life." "It's real," Fletcher assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And it's only going to get better from here. I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret it," Beatrice said. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Fletcher Dalton." The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Beatrice continued working for Martha, though her responsibilities shifted slightly now that she was married. Fletcher worked hard on the ranch, taking on extra duties and responsibilities as Mr. Carter continued to groom him for a leadership position. They spent their evenings in their little cabin, cooking together, reading by lamplight, making love, and planning for the future. In March, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction even though they had talked about wanting children. But Fletcher's face lit up with such pure joy that all her worries vanished. "We're having a baby?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Yes," Beatrice confirmed, smiling through happy tears. "In late October or early November, the doctor thinks." Fletcher swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with delight. Then he set her down carefully, his expression suddenly concerned. "Should I not have done that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby." "We're fine," Beatrice assured him, laughing at his worried face. "I'm not made of glass, Fletcher." But Fletcher insisted on treating her like she was precious china anyway, taking over all the heavy work around their cabin and fretting every time she showed the slightest sign of fatigue. Beatrice found it endearing, even when it was frustrating, knowing it came from a place of love and care. Martha was thrilled by the news and immediately began knitting baby clothes. Mr. Carter congratulated them heartily and told Fletcher he was getting a raise, saying he wanted to make sure the growing family was provided for. The summer was hot and long, and Beatrice's belly swelled with their growing child. She felt ungainly and uncomfortable, especially in the heat, but Fletcher insisted she was more beautiful than ever. He would place his hand on her stomach and marvel when he felt the baby kick, his face full of wonder. In September, Mr. Carter made an announcement that would change their lives. He was getting older, he explained, and he wanted to start passing on more responsibility to the next generation. He had decided to give Fletcher a partnership in the ranch, along with a generous parcel of land where Fletcher could build his own house and start his own herd. Fletcher was stunned into silence, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. Beatrice squeezed his hand, her own heart swelling with pride and joy. "You've earned this, Fletcher," Mr. Carter said. "You're the hardest worker I've ever had and the most trustworthy. I can't think of anyone better to help carry this ranch into the future." Fletcher found his voice finally. "I don't know what to say, sir, thank you. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Mr. Carter said with a smile. They spent the next few weeks planning the house they would build on their new land, a modest but solid structure that would be their true home. Fletcher insisted it should be ready before the baby came, and he worked tirelessly with the other ranch hands to make it happen. The house was completed in mid-October, just 2 weeks before Beatrice's due date. It was a simple wooden structure with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a sitting room, and a wide porch that looked out over their land. It was the most beautiful thing Beatrice had ever seen. They moved in immediately, spending their first night in their new home, wrapped in each other's arms and dreaming about the future. They would fill this house with children and love, Fletcher promised, and they would build something lasting here. On November 3rd, Almost exactly 1 year after Fletcher had found Beatrice dying on that frozen road, she went into labor. Martha and the doctor attended her while Fletcher paced anxiously outside the bedroom, wearing a path in the new floorboards. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. But finally, just as the sun rose, a baby's cry filled the house. Martha emerged from the bedroom with a tired but radiant smile. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy?" Fletcher rushed into the bedroom to find Beatrice propped up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing with happiness, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered and smiled. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Fletcher approached the bed with trembling hands and looked down at the baby in Beatrice's arms. He had a shock of dark hair and bright blue eyes, and he was the most perfect thing Fletcher had ever seen besides his wife. "He's beautiful," Fletcher whispered, awed. "Can I hold him?" Beatrice carefully transferred the baby to Fletcher's arms, showing him how to support the tiny head. Fletcher held his son with infinite gentleness, staring down at the small face with an expression of pure love. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Fletcher knew exactly what the boy should be called. "William," he said, "after my father, William Samuel Dalton." Beatrice nodded, thinking it was fitting. "William," she agreed. "It's perfect." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but Beatrice and Fletcher navigated new parenthood together with patience and humor. William was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching him grow and change brought them immeasurable joy. The following spring, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home while Martha and Benjamin watched William. As they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, Fletcher took Beatrice's hand. "Do you ever think about that night I found you?" he asked quietly. "Every day," Beatrice admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying and how you saved me. Sometimes I still can't believe how much my life has changed." "Mine too," Fletcher said. "I was just going about my business, doing my job, and then suddenly there you were. I didn't know it then, but finding you that night was the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave my life meaning and purpose that it never had before." "We saved each other," Beatrice said softly. "You brought me back to life when I was dying in the cold, but I brought you back to life too in a different way. We were both lost and alone, and we found each other. And now we have all this," Fletcher said, gesturing to the house, the land, and everything they had built together. "A home, a family, a future. Everything I ever dreamed of and more." Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sky turn pink and gold. "I love you, Fletcher Dalton," she said. "Thank you for being the kind of man who stops to help a stranger on the road. Thank you for your kindness and your strength and your love. You're my hero and my partner and the father of my child, and I'm grateful for you every single day." "I love you too, Bea," Fletcher said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm grateful for you. You made me believe in love and family and home. You made me believe in myself. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." They sat together as the stars began to appear, holding hands and dreaming of the future that stretched before them. Inside the house, their son slept peacefully in his cradle. Around them, their land waited to be tended and shaped. Ahead of them lay years of hard work and challenges, but also years of love and growth and building something meaningful together. Time passed, as it always does, and their family grew. 2 years after William was born, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Martha, after Beatrice's mother and Martha Carter. Grace had Beatrice's dark hair and Fletcher's blue eyes, and she was as spirited as her brother was gentle. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas Benjamin, named for Fletcher's father's middle name, and Mr. Carter. Tommy, as they called him, was mischievous and adventurous from the moment he could crawl. Their fourth and final child arrived 3 years later, another daughter named Rose. She was the baby of the family, and her siblings doted on her, though she proved to be perfectly capable of holding her own. The ranch partnership flourished. Fletcher proved to be as skilled at business as he was at ranch work, and under his and Mr. Carter's joint leadership, the Triple Bar grew and prospered. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices and rustlers, but they always came through stronger than before. As the years passed and their children grew, Fletcher and Beatrice never forgot the circumstances that had brought them together. Every November, on the anniversary of the night he had found her, they would take a ride together to the spot where their story began. They would stand in the cold and remember how close they had come to never meeting, never loving, never building this life together. "It's strange," Beatrice said one year, as they stood looking out over the land, their breath misting in the cold air. "If my uncle hadn't abandoned me, if you hadn't been riding that exact road at that exact time, none of this would exist. William, Grace, Tommy, Rose, everything we've built, it all hinged on that one terrible and wonderful night. I don't like to think about what would have happened if I hadn't found you," Fletcher said, pulling her close. "But I'm grateful every day that I did. You're the best thing in my life, Bee. You always have been and you always will be." The children grew and eventually began lives of their own. William, steady and responsible like his father, took over much of the day-to-day ranch operations. Grace married a young lawyer from Helena and moved to town, though she visited often. Tommy became a horse trader, traveling throughout the territory, but always coming home for Christmas. Rose, the youngest, shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, but she proved to have a gift for educating the next generation. Through it all, Fletcher and Beatrice remained partners in every sense of the word. They worked side by side, faced challenges together, celebrated triumphs as a team. Their love never dimmed or faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. When Martha Carter passed away at the age of 72, Beatrice grieved as though she had lost her own mother. Martha had been her mentor and friend, had welcomed her when she had nowhere else to go, and had never once made her feel like anything less than a beloved daughter. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people from across the territory, all of whom had been touched by Martha's kindness and generosity. Benjamin Carter lived another 5 years after his wife's death, continuing to work on the ranch until the very end. When he passed peacefully in his sleep at 78, he left the Triple Bar jointly to Fletcher and William, knowing the ranch he had built would continue to thrive under their care. Fletcher and Beatrice grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love never wavering. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, and their home was always filled with family and laughter. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and family from across Montana. As Beatrice looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the house she and Fletcher had built, at the land they had tended and shaped, she felt overwhelming gratitude for the life she had been given. That evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, she and Fletcher sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. "Do you remember when I asked you to marry me?" Fletcher said, taking her hand. His hands were gnarled with age now, marked with scars from decades of ranch work, but his grip was still strong. "Of course I remember," Beatrice said. "It was on that ridge overlooking the valley, and it was the happiest moment of my life up to that point." "Mine too," Fletcher agreed. "I meant every word I said that day. I said I would spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regretted saying yes to me. Did I succeed?" Beatrice turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it. His face was weathered and lined now, but his eyes were still that brilliant blue, still filled with love when he looked at her. "You exceeded all my expectations," she said softly. "I have never, not for one single moment, regretted marrying you. You've given me a beautiful life, Fletcher, a life filled with love and family and purpose. You brought me back from the edge of death and gave me reasons to live. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and that's saying something because I loved you terribly even then. Fletcher raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I love you too, Bee, more than words can say. You're my miracle, my gift, my everything. They sat together in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, they could hear the soft sounds of their family settling in for the night. This was what they had built together, starting from that night on a frozen road when a young woman lay dying and a cowboy stopped to help. From tragedy and near death had come life and love, and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Their children would carry on the ranch, would tell their own children about how their grandparents met, would keep the story alive for generations to come. Years later, when Beatrice was 73 and Fletcher was 78, they took their last ride together. It was November, the anniversary of the night they met, and though the cold bothered their old bones, they insisted on keeping their tradition. Their grown children worried, but William drove them in a wagon to the spot, understanding how important it was to his parents. They stood together looking out over the land that had been their home for more than half a century, holding hands as they always did. The mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying stories of all the lives that had been lived on this land. We had a good run, didn't we? Fletcher said, his voice still strong despite his years. The best, Beatrice agreed. I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the part where your uncle abandoned you in the cold? Beatrice smiled. Not even that. Because it brought me to you, and you brought me to this life. Everything that came after was worth that one terrible night. Fletcher pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, as she had done thousands of times before. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, he murmured. Still the bravest. Still the one I want beside me every moment of every day. And you're still my hero, Beatrice whispered back. The man who saved my life and then made it worth living. They stood like that for a long time. Two old souls who had weathered life's storms together and come through stronger for it. When the cold finally drove them back to the wagon, they rode home together. Fletcher's arm around Beatrice's shoulders, her head resting against his chest, just as they had ridden together that first night so many years ago. Fletcher passed away peacefully 3 years later in the house he had built, surrounded by his family. Beatrice held his hand as he drew his last breath, whispering that she loved him and would see him again someday. The grief of losing him was profound, but she took comfort in knowing they had made the most of every single day they had been given together. Beatrice lived another 2 years, cared for lovingly by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days telling stories of Fletcher and their life together, making sure the next generation understood what real love looked like. She taught them about resilience and kindness, about stopping to help strangers and seeing the best in people, about building something meaningful through hard work and dedication. On a cold November night, exactly 50 years after Fletcher had found her dying on that frozen road, Beatrice Whitmore Dalton passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 75 years old and had lived a full, rich life beyond anything she could have imagined as a desperate 19-year-old girl abandoned by her uncle. At her funeral, attended by hundreds of people whose lives she and Fletcher had touched, their son William stood to speak. He told the story of how his parents met, how a cowboy had found a freezing woman on a road and had chosen to stop and help when many others might have ridden past. He talked about the love they had shared, the life they had built, the legacy they had left. My father used to say that finding my mother that night was the luckiest moment of his life, William said, his voice thick with emotion. But I think it was luck for all of us, because that moment of kindness, that decision to stop and help a stranger, led to all of this. It led to their love story, to our family, to the ranch that supports dozens of families now. It led to a lifetime of love and hard work and building something meaningful. My parents taught us that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best things if we have the courage to keep going and the wisdom to recognize opportunities when they appear. They taught us about real love, the kind that lasts through hardship and grows stronger with time. And they taught us that we're all responsible for each other, that stopping to help a stranger isn't just the right thing to do, it's the only thing to do. Beatrice and Fletcher were buried side by side in a cemetery overlooking their ranch, there, with a simple headstone that read, Fletcher Dalton and Beatrice Whitmore Dalton, partners in life and in love. Together, they built a legacy of kindness, hard work, and devotion that will endure for generations. The ranch they had built together continued to thrive under their children's management, and then their grandchildren's, carrying on the values of hard work, integrity, and caring for others that Fletcher and Beatrice had instilled. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, salvation might be just around the corner, and that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us leads directly to the best. Every November, the family gathered at the ridge where Fletcher had proposed to Beatrice, where they had stood together for 50 years, remembering how they met. They would tell the story again for the youngest generation, making sure it was never forgotten. They would talk about the importance of helping others, of never giving up hope, of recognizing that love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances. And as they stood there looking out over the land that Fletcher and Beatrice had tended and loved, they understood that their story was not just about two people who fell in love. It was about the power of kindness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the way one moment of compassion can change not just two lives, but generations of lives to come. The cold Montana wind would whisper through the grass, carrying echoes of that long ago night when a dying woman and a compassionate cowboy's paths crossed on a frozen road. It would carry the story forward, ensuring that Fletcher and Beatrice's legacy of love and kindness would never be forgotten, living on in the land they had loved and the family they had created together. Their love story had started with an ending, with Beatrice certain she was going to die alone and forgotten in the cold. But it had transformed into a beginning, a beautiful life full of love and family and purpose. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not how their story started, but how they lived it, day by day, year by year, always together, always devoted, always grateful for the chance encounter that had given them everything they ever wanted. The sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the land settled into evening quiet. Somewhere in that vast landscape, the spirits of Fletcher and Beatrice Dalton rested peacefully, together as they had always been, their love story complete, their legacy assured, their impact on the world lasting far beyond their mortal years.